Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name is Brian, and in this video we're going to be doing part 2 of the 2023 rules update. Now I know Cool Mini or Not is saying that it is they officially call it the 2021.02 update or something like that. I'm just going to stick with 2023 for the remainder of the video. If I ever refer to it, I think it's, if anything, it makes it seem like it should have came out 2 years ago, or they started making the changes 2 years ago and just waited to do them till now. But we have it, and this video is going to cover Freefolk and Night's Watch, since there's a ton of stuff to do in here, and then the final video will have the rest of the factions. So the first update we have for Night's Watch is going to be Coldhands, the Enigmatic Guide. If you didn't stick around for, or if you didn't catch part 1 here because you just wanted to focus on the factions in this video, Coldhands received a universal change to the rule Outflank, and this simply states that you may hold this unit off the table in reserve instead of deploying it. At the start of any round, if you are not the first player, you may place one unit from reserve fully within short range of a friendly flank or friendly or flank table edge. Sorry. He also he retained his Pathfinder ability that just states the unit ignores the dangerous, hindering, and rough keywords. But Outflank change is pretty cool. You no longer have to try and claim the zone on the tactics board in order to get this to go off. You can just make it happen as long as you're not the first player. So that does mean you can do it on turn 1 if you have the bottom of the round. Another cool thing about Outflank is that before you could only choose flank table edges, but now you can get them on your friendly table edge. Not that that's something that you particularly would want to do, but there could be situations where maybe your opponent's got something super in your front, in the front of your, something really in front of your face, and you just were like, okay, well, this was a mistake. I need to get right in the center. But like, think of maybe like Feast for Crows or something. I don't know. Weird corner case scenarios where you might want to deploy on your friendly table edge, but I really like the changes to Outflank and think that Coldhands, the Enigmatic Guide, actually has some interesting play in Night's Watch. I know it's holding a lot of points off the table because most things in Night's Watch are extremely expensive, but seeing something like the Rangers coming in off the table edge can be really devastating to your opponent. So next up in attachment changes, we get Jon Snow, or Jon Snow with the title of Lord Snow. This is his attachment version. There were changes to Warcry. This is another universal change in the game. So now simply Warcry states that you have to either you pass the morale test and you either panic someone or vulnerable them. You can't do both. So in Night's Watch, I don't think that's a really big problem for them, or this is a really big deal. It's just, again, mark the target with stipulations and a little bit of variability. Like Night's Watch, I don't seem to be leaning into panic so much. There might be corner case situations where it would really work out for you, but for the most part, I think they'd be slinging vulnerable tokens anyways, so I don't really feel like this is a massively impactful change for Lord Snow. Warcry is still going to be really valuable in just about any army that it gets into. Next up, we get another kind of universal change for the game, and that's going to be for Jon Snow, the 998th Lord Commander, his commander version. He retained Boldness and Courage, but they removed Rally Cry, which I believe is just completely removed from the game, and then added Furious Charge to him. So Furious Charge states when enemies successfully charged by this unit become vulnerable. So Rally Cry, I think it does a pretty good amount of work to kind of pull back a little bit on the power of Jon Snow as a commander. I think most Night's Watch players, you would be really hard pressed to find someone who didn't have Jon Snow in their list, in their pairing for competitive play. He just had so much sustain, and the amount of work that he could do was pretty intense. But having lost Rally Cry means that I think his list loses a little bit of survivability. I don't think it completely takes him out of the discussion when it comes to competitive play, or if you really like Jon Snow, he still does a lot of the same stuff. It's just that he's not as forgiving, and that he can't just heal like 4 wounds per per round if you're taking the swords. So I think this is a fine change. Furious Charge is all right for him. Getting vulnerable on the charge is nice. I think the Night's Watch has a pretty good ability to like take maybe like 2 combats to kill something that they're engaged with if you're picking your right targets. So I think it turns Jon Snow from being like this immovable fortress to maybe wanting to start play a little bit more as a quick charging, killy type unit. Like that's what you'd want him in instead of sticking him in veterans or something and just holding the center while he fuels up your other units. So I don't think this removes Jon Snow completely. It just pulls back on his power a little bit, which I'm okay with. I don't think he needed to just get completely nerfed into oblivion to where he never sees the table again. But I think this was a fairly delicate change to him, and I'm not too like upset by it. Next up, we have Othell Yarwick, the first builder. He was also another one who kind of was subject to universal changes. There was a change to the rule Hardened. So Hardened now states, each time an enemy is performing an attack on this unit, after rolling defense dice, this unit blocks 1 hit plus 1 hit for each of its destroyed ranks. So the big change for this is that Hardened used to just always block an additional hit, whether you were missing ranks or not. It was 1 hit plus 1 additional hit for each destroyed rank. And with Othell Yarwick just having a really good suite of tactics cards, and Night's Watch already having some really good defensive cards within their tactics deck, it made Othell's unit very difficult to get rid of. So where you had Jon Snow, who was like, I don't care how much damage you do to me, I'm going to be able to heal it back. Othell Yarwick was like, you will not get me off of this point, and I will just exist here, continuing to, spotter if you're bringing war machines, which I don't think was really the big thing for him, but using all of his tactics cards to make sure that his army can do some extra work is really where Othell was shining, and I think that this doesn't completely remove him from the game for sure. It just makes it so that you actually might have a chance to get rid of him as the game goes on, and I'm perfectly fine with this. Next up in the world of attachments, we get a change to Satin, the commander's steward. I don't know if it's Satin or Satine. I think it's Satin. But at any rate, they retained the rule commander's vassal, but there's some changes to it. Now it states, this model counts as having your commander's name for all abilities and effects. Previously, commander's vassal only allowed you to have the name for to be treated as the commander when you're targeted by tactics cards. And again, I don't have a photographic memory of every single ability and rule in the game to be able to tell you how impactful this is, being able to be targeted by abilities and effects that the commander attachment might have. I don't know how prolific that is, or if it's going to be something we might see more of later on in the game, but it's a increased change regardless, because even if it doesn't affect anything right now, it at least makes it so more things could affect it in the future. So nothing, the change, I don't know if we're going to feel it just yet. If you know something that I don't, then you can leave it in the comment section below. But just the vassal changes is an upgrade. So next up for attachment changes is going to be to the commander, Sir Dennis Malister, Shadow Tower Commander. The change for him was another universal one, and it was to Knightly Vow. Now Knightly Vow. Currently, after the update, Knightly Vow states, after deployment, target one enemy unit when charging that enemy. This unit may reroll any charge dice or charge distance dice. And then the second bullet point for this one is, while you control the sword, this unit's melee attacks gain +1 to hit. So it's a volatile change for Knightly Vow, in my opinion. I think the goal was to try and make Knightly Vow better and have it not just be a one and done thing, especially when you were paying points for it. For a commander, it's not such a big deal because you're, not paying anything for him. But Knightly Vow previously, you would only get that +1 to hit and rerolls against the unit that you've taken the Knightly Vow against. So you always had the +1 to hit against them and always had the charge distance dice. Now you always have the charge distance dice against them and only have +1 to hit when you own the swords, but it's +1 to hit anything. So I talked about it with Brienne of Tarth the Maiden of Tarth in the first part of this video. I think that Knightly Vow is still kind of shaky. There's just a lot of stipulations to it. Like reroll charge distance, typically you're only going to connect with your Knightly Vow target once, and either your opponent's going to die or you will die. So you only really get that benefit once per game, in my opinion, unless your opponent's being slippery or you are being slippery. But then when you control the swords, that's when you're going to get your +1 to hit all the time, and I feel like they should at least get the +1 to hit against their Knightly Vow target, and then against anything if they have the swords. It just seems weird to me that there's like this extra stipulation on here that only works when you're really feeling that combat fire. So Knightly Vow, I think, is probably in a better place than what it was before, but it's still not quite where I feel like it needs to be. It just needs a little tweak. The final change for attachments in the Night's Watch army is going to be to the Watch Captain. So the Watch Captain got a universal change to Relentless, and then they dropped from 3 to 2 points. So they've retained Boldness and Courage, that's not changed, but Relentless now states, after this unit is attacked, this unit may perform 1 melee attack action. And I really like this. I did have a list for Night's Watch that leveraged double Watch Captain to just try and get some extra activations and get my Sworn Brothers up the table really fast. It wasn't an amazing list, but it was definitely interesting in that your opponent had a hard time focusing or applying their units the way they needed to because it would get really clumpy in the middle. So you just have this really elite list that had a lot of activations, and being able to attack like 3 times with one unit was pretty amazing. When it worked, it was awesome, but most of the time it was really weird. Anyways, now with Relentless, your Night's Watch units are going to be sticking around a long time, and your opponent's going to be massively de-incentivized to take the swords and attack this unit, because then you will essentially get to return the favor and activate like normal, and if your opponent attacks them again, you will also attack. So every time your opponent hits you, you're swinging back at them, and with a lot of the Night's Watch stuff, in conjunction with Boldness and Courage, having that +1 attack die or an additional rank when you're attacking makes it so that I don't think anyone's going to want to touch Watch Captain units. They're going to kind of back off on them and try and play a little cagey around them. So I think that with the lowering in points, still seeing double Watch Captains is something that could definitely be a thing, but I really do enjoy the change they made to Watch Captain. I think there could be a way this bites them in the butt in the future, as I think Relentless might be a little powerful on some of the armies that got a hold of it. So I'm interested to see where this one goes, but overall I'm pretty happy with the changes to the Watch Captain. Next up, the Night's Watch received 1 unit change, but technically 2. That would be for the Ranger Vanguards. They had the simple change of their defense being improved from 5+ to 4+, which I think definitely puts them in a more interesting spot, but they also, I think they missed it on their change log where they also had outflank, so they got the main change to it to where they don't have to take the maneuver position to do it anymore. So Ranger Vanguards outflanking is actually a really interesting prospect now, instead of having your opponent be able to stop you from doing it. Ambush should go off relatively regularly, and with a 4+ save and a 5+ morale with a 7/5 attack stat, I think that these guys are quite a strong unit now, a good pick. 7 points still maybe might be a little too much for them, maybe. I don't know. We'll have to see how Outflank plays out, because I think it has the potential to be really strong or kind of meh, but these guys are definitely worth more than the Ranger Hunters, the mounted Rangers. Why can't I remember their name? It's probably because I don't play Night's Watch all that much. The Ranger Trackers, sorry. So Vanguard, I think they're really good right now. They have a lot of value to them. Before it was like they were too paper in terms of survivability, and Outflank just wasn't worth the points, but I do think it is worth the points now, and I look forward to kind of seeing these on the table a little bit more. Next up, we've got some great changes that came to the Night's Watch NCUs, and the first one's going to be Donald Noy, the Expert Blacksmith. The changes that happened to him are just simply that he dropped from 5 points to 4, and I think that works out pretty well for him. It feels like he's more worth his points now, because he only had the 2 order tokens, and his items were a little bit more situational. I mean, like, re-rolling attack dice is always valuable, but the expending weakened, sometimes doesn't come up, and then always getting +1 to defense dice rolls is really good. Now that Othell doesn't have hardened anymore, I think he becomes a little bit more like okay at the lowered point level. I think I really enjoyed Donal Noy before when he was at 5 points, but now that he's gone to 4 in an army that has a lot of trouble trying to find the points for things, I think he becomes a really competitive choice for Night's Watch, even if he can only do his thing twice. But getting +1 to defense saves at the right time is massive, and being able to reroll dice against a unit you're engaged with can also be a really big deal, especially if they're trying to weaken you. I think that Donal Noy has a lot of value at the 4-point slot. Next up, we've got Corran Halfhand, the Unwavering Ranger. Another simple change for him. He went down from 6 to 5 points. And I have, for funsies, played Corran Halfhand at that 6-point level, and I thought that his influence for Halfhand's guidance was pretty decent. I enjoyed it. Getting the +1 speed and +1 attack die just was a bit of utility that was added to the list. And then just having Sacrifice for the Cause in your back pocket could really shut your opponent out in that late game where you feel like maybe the tactics board isn't so valuable, and stopping your opponent from wiping out something that holds an objective or even getting onto an objective can be game breaking. But 6 points still felt really rough, and 6 points for a model that you plan to just destroy can also be a little harsh. So Corran Halfhand at 5 points now, I think that's a really good, it's a big balance point, right? Like there's a huge break when you go down from 6 points to 5, because you go from like somewhat unreasonably costed for what you do, unless it's extremely justified by your ability, to I can actually see this getting into a list, because 5 is like okay to spend on an NCU. So I think Corran Halfhand, just like Donal Noy, is going to see a little bit more play in lists, especially when people realize that Halfhand's guidance helps you get to the end game a little bit better, and then Sacrifice for the Cause helps you own the end game a little bit better. I think he's going to be a strong piece, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of him in the future. The final change for Night's Watch is one that has been a long time coming, and that's going to be to Gilly, the Wildling Girl. They changed the wording for Samwell's influence. So now, Samwell's influence states, Gilly does not activate each round. Once per game, at the start of a friendly turn, you may activate Gilly. Do not activate another unit this turn. So the issue with Gilly was that she didn't have that first sentence that says Gilly does not activate each round, because the way it was working out in the rules was that NCUs have to activate each round. And there was nothing in the game that was stopping Gilly from saying, oh, I have to activate on turn 1, even though, like, I think all of us knew that the intention of her existence as a 0-point NCU was use her when you need her, and then that'll be that. Now, every time I've played Night's Watch with Samwell as an NCU in my list, I have done my opponent the courtesy, in quotes, of activating Gilly first round, because I was typically taking Sam for the increased hand size. But I wanted to make sure I was staying true to the rules, because I think when you start playing with intention, or interpreting rules with intention, things get really sticky really quick, because wherever you go, from local store to home table to event, people's interpretation of how something works could really change. And I prefer to follow kind of the letter of the rule book. So if something is funky and I feel like it really should be working a different way, I try to maintain the integrity of the game by following the rules. So I'm extremely happy they did this. I am not extremely stoked that they didn't just make this change in an FAQ when she first came out, because it could have been low-hanging fruit to just say, hey, guess what, guys, you can do this. I don't know if that actually made it anywhere, because I don't think I ever saw it on a forum or anything. So it's late but appreciated, the change to Gilly. So I think you might start seeing Sam get played a little bit more, because I think that at 5 points he brings a lot of cool stuff to the Night's Watch list, and Gilly just helps you do some extra stuff towards the end, especially if you try to pair like Samwell and Corran together. It can make it so you don't feel the burn of losing him late game, because you can hold Gilly until the turn that you sacrifice Corran Halfhand and actually get that full set of NCUs. So I think like I said, a change we all expected, but just maybe a little bit later than what we wanted it to. So that rounds out all the changes for Night's Watch. Overall, I think they're in a better place than what they were. Losing out on the unstoppable nature of Jon Snow can hurt a little bit, but I think as all the iterations of Jon Snow have come around, the people who like him still play him, and if you're like leaning into the competitive nature of him, maybe you might start looking elsewhere. But I really do think losing Rally Cry does not kneecap his value in the game. I think that he's still extremely strong, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of the new pieces that we might not have seen come on the table. Like, I think Corrin Halfhand, people are going to start cursing him as soon as they start seeing him more often, and the Ranger Vanguards actually feel like they can do some work in certain lists. Watch Captain, I think they're going to be very present in lists, so watch out for those things, especially since Expert Duelist has changed to where they're a little bit safer. So overall, I like the changes that they made to Night's Watch. There probably could have been a few more out there. Like, I still think Benjen, the infantry commander, is still a little bit behind the curve in what he can do based on what he has access to. But overall, I think things are looking pretty good for Night's Watch coming into this update. Now we can transition into the Freefolk updates, and I think out of all the factions, they probably got the most impactful changes, and impactful in interesting ways, which I don't think is a bad thing, so to speak. So let's just jump right into it with their attachments. The first one up is going to be Jarl Advanced Raid Leader. He just got the universal change to Outflank. I think he is fine. I don't know how many units of Freefolk I want to start off the table, but with lists typically being able to go really wide, and certain Freefolk units being extremely valuable to have, kind of tearing up your opponent's backline, I think that Jarl could actually see some play. The outflank change was really good for him. So that's pretty much it. 1 point for holding a unit off that comes in when you feel like it, for the most part. So next up is going to be the first doozy on the list here, out of multiple, I think. It's going to be a change to Mance Rayder, King Beyond the Wall. So the big changes for him are going to be that he removed rally point. They added boisterous charisma and then added the king is dead. So first, boisterous charisma is an innate ability that states this unit may never be targeted by enemy orders, tactics cards, or be influenced by enemy NCUs. I think that this is good for him because you want Mance's unit to stick around and you want to stop your opponent from manipulating him so much, especially in conjunction with the fact that he's added another innate ability called the king is dead. This states, when Mance is destroyed, your opponent gains 2 victory points, and each of your units within long range becomes panicked. So I know that a lot of people are probably like, what the heck is this? Why does this have to be on Mance? So first, I think when we look at the comparison of who lost it, Joffrey, and who gained it, Mance, the Freefolk really rally behind him. That's like their key point. He is the reason why a lot of Freefolk are working together. So if he's gone, that kind of craps on the whole the whole kind of faction here, this confederacy of people. I don't know if you call it a confederacy. It's a group of people under one banner, and that banner happens to be Mance's forehead. So if he's dead, getting 2 extra victory points for your opponent seems appropriate. Additionally, Freefolk Raiders still don't give you victory through combat. So I think it's a way to kind of balance it out. If you're losing Mance, you probably have done something horribly wrong, or the game's going not in your favor anyways. So I don't feel like the king is dead is as big of a problem in the Freefolk list as it might have been in the Lannister list. It's going to be hard for your opponent to carve out Mance a little bit. Additionally, losing Rally Point is a pretty big deal for him. It makes it so that your Freefolk Raiders actually take a little bit more effort to clip through, because having a bubble of 5+ morale for all of your Freefolk Raiders made it so that your opponent was really unlikely to get through them. Like, I've sat engaged with a unit of Jon Snow veterans for 3 turns with 3 different units of Freefolk Raiders, just beating on them until they die, and they didn't lose much of anything because of that morale stat. So I think those are some of the things, or the rally point is one of the really big things that made Mance extremely potent, and I think that removing that off there kind of makes it so that Freefolk players might start looking in other directions for some of their main commanders, but I don't feel like Mance has gotten kind of ban-hammered into oblivion to where he's not playable. His cards are still really great. Counter strategy is still is an extremely useful ability, but I don't know if counter strategy is really like necessary with boisterous charisma. I do see that, like, if your opponent has an order that doesn't technically target you, then it's probably fine to make sure that you can stop that. But, you know, I think they probably work together better than what I think. They just seem at face value, they seem a little bit like redundant, but I think overall Mance is still going to be a good commander. You just have to be careful with him, which everybody was doing anyways because of rally point. So I don't think I think the biggest changes here that you're going to see are people just trying to the Freefolk Raiders are going to go down a lot faster. Like between that and Endless Horde, which spoilers also changed, it was very unlikely for me to end a Mance game with many Freefolk Raiders dead, like maybe 2 units off the table that I brought with me. So I think that the change was deserved, and I'm interested to see if Freefolk players pivot in their building, or if we're still just going to kind of see these Mance lists running around because he is still a fairly strong commander. But I do think a lot of people put a ton of value into rally point. Next up on the list, we have the Great Walrus, Lord of the Frozen Shore. Now, he was kind of caught in the crosshairs of a change to Hardened. So it's same thing with Othell. He just blocks the 1 hit for each destroyed rank now. I really feel like they could have taken the opportunity here to, since Freefolk don't have extremely survivable units, like we're not getting those 3+ units, I think Hardened could have probably been changed to where the name was different, but it blocked the additional hit normally. You're talking about Thens being some of the most survivable thing in Freefolk right now, unless we end up getting another Frozen Shore unit that's got like a big 3+ save that he could go into. But we really don't have that. I think that it's not going to happen either. So Hardened, the change here is like, I'm okay with it, because there's also kind of like this weird world that he exists in where he has go down fighting and harden, so it didn't really trigger all that much. But now you'll see it trigger a little bit more with them not being able to block that additional hit. So there could have been an opportunity here to change him into something a little bit different and a little bit more unique for the game, to kind of continue that trend of having unique things in the Freefolk army. But he just got clipped by a rule change that other factions were probably abusing more than he was. Still a decent commander. I think he's just waiting for the right units. Our final change to attachments here is going to be to Tormund's Giantsbane, Tall Talker, Hornblower, Breaker of Ice. So the only thing that changed on him was Warcry, which changed across the game. Same thing with Jon Snow. I think for Tormund, it's a little bit like it is for the Lannisters. Like, the Lannisters really utilized a lot of the vulnerable because they needed the extra help doing the damage, whereas Panic was something they could lean in heavily to. I think it's kind of the opposite for Freefolk, where they really needed the vulnerable. Well, no, I guess it's kind of the same, but they just don't lean into it. So they like having the vulnerable because they don't have mass attacks in each activation. Like, it just doesn't really happen all that much. And then with Panicked, it was, if you got there, you could use it, but it was another big thing for Weeper to have access to something like Warcry and Vulnerable, so he could get through the enemy and then actually get to that panic check where they could fail it. Overall, I don't think it's a big problem that this change happened, because, again, you'll be able to pick what you need that's more relevant to you at the moment, and it makes like condition removal a little bit more relevant. But I don't mind the change at all. It's still, Tormund is still going to go into most every single list I build, because having access to Vulnerable and Stalwart, especially with the rally point change, I think it just more further solidifies that you're not really going to see Tormund as a commander anymore, because you really need that morale buff. Like, if they had an Emboldened unit, then I think that would change. Like, maybe that's what Mance should have gotten instead of Rally Point. I know I'm going back to Mance, but, like, maybe he could have had Embolden and it would have fit a little bit better. Like, Inspiring Presence plus Embolden. Like, call that good, and then you probably wouldn't have to rely on these Stalwart units so much. But as it stands, I really have a hard time seeing any list outside of Giants where Tormund isn't in it. So the first unit change we have to the Freefolk army is going to be to the Cave Dweller Savages. So pretty much in every single one of the attachments we've had so far, the changes are for the worst, other than the changes to Outflank. But for the Cave Dweller Savages, we've got our first super buff here, and that's going to be changes to Frenzied Swing. Frenzied Swing has lost the stipulation that says for each one you roll, you take a wound. Now they just get +1 to hit for each of their destroyed ranks, and they still have that really good attack stat of 6, 7, 8. They maintain Sundering, so it just means that Cave Dweller Savages still are your rocket unit. You don't want them to be the first unit you send in because they aren't going to really survive with a 6+ defense save. But this is definitely a really big buff for them to lose the wound output that they'd be doing to themselves, because if you're weakened on top of that, it just really isn't a good time to be losing your Cave Dweller Savages when they're attacking, and then losing so many when your opponent's attacking you. I love the Cave Dweller Savages. I have ever since they came out in every iteration they've been in, and I really think that with the change to Frenzied Swings, they're still just a super great unit to have following some raiders around, so you can get some extra forward-facing combat in your infantry lists. The next unit change we have is to the Frozen Shore Bear Riders. They gained the rule Charging Volley. Charging Volley is an order that states after this unit completes a ranged attack, this unit performs one charge action on the defender. This is huge, massive. I love the Frozen Shore Bear Riders. I have my 2 units, and I've put them on the table multiple times. I love them in Rattleshirt lists, and I always lamented the fact that they had the Spear Toss because it never came up. You never wanted to use this rule unless it was something that you could maybe like get a first turn, you're like, I march with my Bear Riders, and then second turn I can just throw 4 spears at something and call it good. But now, if you're close enough, you get to do your 4-inch move, shift 2 inches, throw your spears, and then you can charge after that. This makes the spear toss so amazing. Like, I love that they took the rule from the Spear Wives and put them on the Frozen Shore Bear Riders. This is like, of all the changes that have happened, outside of maybe one in this update, this is the one that I'm most excited about. I can't wait to get my Coke Bears back on the table and start throwing spears around and charging in. It just increases their output on an already dangerous unit, and I couldn't be happier with this change. I'm really excited for the Frozen Shore Bear Riders. The next unit up is going to be another Frozen Shore unit. We're pretty much hitting every Frozen Shore unit with this update, and that's to the Frozen Shore Chariots. They increased from 4 points to 5 points, which I feel like is warranted. 4 points for what this unit did was really big. They just do so much work, and the bigger the unit is that you're going into, the more work you do. Like getting an auto 3 hits for charging a fresh unit, having Sundering and Vicious, and being able to move away after you end up making that attack for them was big. They're speed 6, so they can just rocket around the table and do crazy things. In an army where you can put in a lot of cheap units, having something like the Frozen Shore Chariots was pretty big. This is like another version of the Cave Dweller Savages, but just a little bit more impactful, I think. Like, if you were to do something like charge in with Frozen Shore Chariots and then charge in with those Cave Dweller Savages, it wasn't unlikely that you just end up taking the unit off the table that you're going into. I always like the buddy cop thing of Tormund and the Frozen Shore Chariots. I do wish that with the point increase, they could have taken their wounds up to 8. I would have liked to see that happen, but still, I think this unit's quite valuable, and with them being chariots too, there's a little bit of a rough one with that, because if they were cavalry, then they could get the cool things that Rattleshirt does, but maybe that's by design. They'd be too good with some of his trophies, but an 8 hit points probably would have been okay with these guys with the increase, but they still are something that you'll see on the table. Maybe not in pairs of 2 or 4, but you might see like 1 or 2. But that's I think this is a fine change for the game. They were probably too strong at 4 points. So the recently released Frozen Shore Hunters also got a change here, and I think this is the only one of its kind in this update if I remember correctly. But specifically, their errata change document states range corrected to short range. So that means that when the Frozen Shore Hunters first came out with the long range icon, Cool Mini or Not, or whoever's writing this change log, states that it was a typo that they had long range. And to be honest with you, I can believe it. The mark target having long range made sense with them also being able to throw their harpoons at long range. But I think they just, like, for their points, being a long range unit, they were just really way too good in my opinion. I was like, I will put 2, maybe 4 of these in a list and not really be worried about it. You're able to spam a bunch of shots. with marked target out there. I still think that with the change, they're still quite valuable. Like, they're not just the unit that's going to sit on your objective and throw spears all day. But with the changes to Warcry, I think marked target is just like a more reliable Warcry. Because you're mostly going to be chasing that vulnerable token, and short range isn't the biggest problem for them. This way they can, shoot at 8 inches if they want to, or they can try and go for the charge. I don't know. Maybe the harpoon isn't so valuable on them anymore, and they're really just like better as a marked target charging enemies that makes them weakened. Who knows? But I'm interested to see how other people approach these. I still think they've got places in the list because of marked target, but losing out on that long range on the harpoon maybe makes them feel a little like the ranged weapon doesn't feel so impactful or valuable on them. But we'll see how it all plays out. Right now, I think I'm understandable that this was a typo. Like, I don't think they did the long range with the intention, and then somebody's just trying to save face by saying, oh yeah, we meant something completely different. So that's not the vibe that I'm getting here, but I can see how some people might think that. However, short range on harpoons kind of lines up with just about everyone else who's throwing spears in this game. So I still think they're a good unit. I'm still going to play a lot of them. So it's just it's interesting change, I guess. Next up for unit changes, we have Wun Wun. The only thing that happened here was that Wun Wun picked up the Warcry change, so you have to be panicked or you put out a panicked or vulnerable token. Again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, and maybe this is me from just like my Freefolk perspective, because I do like playing them quite a bit. But I think that Wun Wun, he's a massive giant, so I would feel like his Warcry could be a little bit more impactful. They could have changed it to like Giant Scream or something like that, or Giant something. I don't know. They could have put a cool, fun name on there and then just said that the unit becomes panicked and vulnerable. But I don't think that that's too much to say that you're stapling a full Warcry on an 8-point unit that only has 6 wounds. Granted, he's got all the other giant abilities, but regardless, I think that the Warcry change here is not a big problem for him. I don't think people will be taking him as much as they had been before. There might be a little bit of a pullback from him, but I think if you really value the vulnerable or panicked, which is probably going to be valuing the vulnerable, Wun Wun's still a decent choice for a Freefolk list. Next up, we have the tactics cards changes for Freefolk, and they got quite a few of them, and deservedly so for the most part. I think that their tactics deck went from being really unimpactful to being extremely impactful, and for the first change, we have mostly a clarification here. It's on coordination tactics. Post errata, coordination tactics triggers at the start of any turn. You target 2 friendly infantry units in short range of each other. Until the end of the turn, both units gain any non-innate abilities on the other unit. You may immediately trigger one unused start of the turn order on either of those units. So the big thing here is that they clarified that the coordination tactics doesn't convey innate abilities. Sorry. So I think the reason for this is that things got very confusing with how innate abilities function. There's a ability within that innate that just says that this ability is innate and cannot be removed for any reason. I don't think I'm quoting the rule verbatim, but essentially coordination tactics was in this interesting discussion point where if you conveyed the giant ability to another unit, it was an ability. There was no clarification before that said, you don't take those, but once you take that ability, it can't be removed. So I think that was probably one of the big reasons why they made this change here, because essentially you could have like a unit of Thens running around that were treated like giants for the entirety of the game, because even though coordination tactics stated until the end of the turn they gain those abilities, innate abilities said you can't lose them for any reason. So I think that's really why we have this clarification on coordination tactics, and I don't know how many Freefolk players were actually trying to abuse that rule to take advantage of it. Now I know that I had said in the Gilly section that I usually go by the cards. I think in this point I just kind of didn't go by pulling innate abilities. First of all, I never really had a chance to do it in my Freefolk lists, but the other big thing is I feel like it's kind of taking advantage of a rule that just was in a weird place. So I guess I didn't engage in it, but I never had the opportunity to do it. So like it never came up. But I think in my own games, I probably would just, I don't know. Maybe I'm being contradictory to what I said earlier, but it just seems kind of rough that you would be abusing the game that way. Typically, I will like house rule if it's lesser in my favor, because I'm not trying to take advantage of rules that just got written in a way that weren't very considerate of what else is going on in the game. So I think that's like my coordination tactics soapbox, even though it's just a small soapbox. But I think the changes here are fine. I think most people anticipated this was going to happen. Again, another thing that could have happened in an FAQ to just change it, but I guess changing it on the actual tactics card works out. So the next tactics card up to change is There's Too Many. This triggers when an enemy is performing a panic test before dice are rolled. That enemy suffers -1 to their roll for each of your friendly units within short range up to 3. So There's Too Many previously just had the stipulation that it was -1 to the roll and +1 wound for each unit within short range up to 3. And this was definitely a card that I abused on multiple occasions. If you have a vicious unit and then happen to have a champion of bone hanging around in one of your units to get up that intimidating presence, it was really not all that difficult to get -6 panic tests that end up having an additional 4 wounds on top of what they were normally taking. So this card got pretty bonkers. It was one of the more dangerous ones that you could find in a Freefolk list if people were really playing into it. And even when you weren't, automatically suffering bare minimum 4 wounds from a failed panic test is really unfortunate, especially if you were in a flank or something like that, to even increase the likelihood that would fail. Stacking in Warcry to make sure you're getting the unit panicked. It was just an extremely reliable way to machine gun down a full rank before they even decided to throw dice. So I think I'm fine with the change to There's Too Many. It makes it a lot less likely for a Freefolk activation to just steamroll through a unit, but it does ensure that they'd be a little bit more it might be easier to make them fail that panic test. So I don't mind the change to There's Too Many, because I have definitely used it in its most extreme cases of making my opponent unhappy, and it was definitely a card that needed to have something happen to it. The final tactics cards change for the Freefolk deck is going to be the Endless Horde. This triggers at the start of any turn. You now target one friendly infantry unit and attach this card to them until the end of the game. When this unit's destroyed, you place one Freefolk Raiders unit with one raid leader attached to it fully within long range of a friendly table edge unactivated. So Endless Horde previously just let you take the maneuver position on the tactics board and then just manifest a free unit of Freefolk Raiders. Or you could go ahead and get back a different infantry unit that happened to have perished earlier. So Endless Horde could get really nasty. I mean, if you had this in your opening hand and you had first turn, you're throwing down a brand new unit of Freefolk Raiders. And with 2 of these in your deck, it wasn't unlikely to just end up having an extra 8 points hanging around. And it made it very, unfortunate to play against them. You definitely got that feeling that you were playing against an Endless Horde, but there was just too much compounding to make things rough. That's why when I was saying earlier in my Mance lists, it was really quite frequent that I wouldn't lose more than 2 units of Freefolk Raiders all day, because the Endless Horde just replaced the other 2 that I had lost with the morale bubble and all that. So I don't hate the change to Endless Horde, because now it's like I can get it out of my hand, make sure that I'm fueling my hand back up, since Freefolk don't have the greatest ways of drawing cards out there. And it kind of can make it so if you're putting this on a unit there's a little bit of interesting play with it, because it's not just, I'm going to put this on a Freefolk Raider unit, you're going to kill it, and then I'm just going to get another one. There's ways you can just throw this down on a unit that you want to stick around. But your opponent is then de-incentivized to try and go after them if they don't want to deal with another unit of Freefolk Raiders with a raid leader. But I can definitely see people using this to kind of put up a sacrificial first unit of Freefolk Raiders to start the peace trade, even though I don't think Freefolk really trades quickly, so it's more of like an attritional trade. But throwing a unit up there to bait your opponent to come into the middle of the table so the rest of your army can get into it feels like you're not sacrificing a lot when you've got Endless Horde on here. I think it changes Endless Horde from a very it's more, I think Endless Horde was very close to a negative play experience, but not exactly right there with the way that we had with the way people could interact with the maneuver zone. But I think that the new Endless Horde has a little bit more depth to it and some more interesting play. So I don't really hate the change all that much. It's just a lot of this, like, a lot of these changes seem to be like results of Mance being where he was before. But I think the Endless Horde is fine and adds what the card is trying to convey in a Freefolk army. The final change to Freefolk, in my opinion, is worth every single nerf that might have hit this faction, and that's going to be to Mag the Mighty's special card that he comes with that's called Chieftain of the Giants. This is basically just like a rule that comes with him, but it's just on a card, and it states you may select Mag the Mighty as your commander. If you do, his points cost becomes 5 instead of the usual 9, and then you just replace the Freefolk deck with his. This is amazingly cool. I love playing Mag the Mighty as a commander. I think he has so many like cool ways to play the game, but I always felt like when I put him on the table that I really had to stretch myself thin to make this work, and if I made a single mistake, it usually cost me the game because I had so few things to work with. Like with Mag the Mighty, you want to have you like having 1/1 is really nice, and you want to have a lot of giants, but giants are expensive, and when you look at your next cheapest unit that fits into his monster theme, you're looking at mammoths, and those are also not very cheap. So having to pay 9 points to use your commander was just such a difficult negotiation to make. Like I said, you had to play the list flawlessly in order to get it to work. But now with the extra 4 points, I might be converting some of those mammoths into giants, or I might be able to have more than one NCU in my list because that's how I played it. It was just it was a giant, 1/1 Magmar, and 2 mammoths, and then Craster. That was the list. But now I can actually play that same list and bring in a second NCU if I want, or I can just keep the one NCU business and try and get more giants in or something like that. There's just a lot of cool things that you can do now with those 4 points. It's a lot to be able to get into the list, and I'm really happy for this because like I said, I love the giants and the monster aesthetic so much in the Freefolk army, and it gives you a really nice like contrasting element in a pairing where you can do a list that has lots and lots of bodies, and then you can do a list that has lots of pain in these monsters and giants. So this is definitely the coolest thing that's happened in this whole update, and I'm extremely excited for it. I guess like it's right up there with the Frozen Shore Bear Riders. I don't know which one I'm more excited about though. Overall, with the changes to Freefolk, I don't think we're going to see Mance fall out of massive favor. I still think he's going to be utilized a lot. It's a lot like Freefolk and Night's Watch had a lot of the same problems where like Jon Snow was like the commander, or Mance was the commander that you would run into, and then anyone else that was in the pairing was just them screwing around because like in a competitive sense you would play those two really powerful commanders. They're still going to be out there. They're probably just not going to be in the frequency that you would see. You might see some people actually throwing down with like some Walrus lists, or getting competitive players dropping Magmar or Mag the Mighty on the table. So I'm really happy with where Freefolk's going to be sitting at once this all comes to fruition, and I'm hopeful that the people who have picked up Freefolk because of the efficacy of things like Mance come to respect the other elements in the army if they've just been in this one Mance mode. I'm really looking forward to the creativity that can come out of the Freefolk players, because the army, it does have so many awesome and unique things that really should be seeing more play on that tabletop. But with Mance's prevalence, if you wanted to get into a competitive mindset with the game, then that was really the way to go. It was almost like if you put any other infantry-based commander on the table, you could really just plug Mance in it and the list would immediately be better. I don't know if that's so much the case anymore. I'm hoping that it's not, but I'm interested to see how the future plays out for Freefolk. Thanks again for sticking around till the end of the video. This one definitely had a lot more to talk about than any of the other ones, but I'm interested to see what other people are thinking about. Were there some things that you wish were touched that weren't? I know there's some things that I would have liked to have seen change that didn't, but I'm also interested to see what you're most excited about with this. Do you share my love for the Frozen Shore Bear Riders and the All Giants list? I don't think that the Night's Watch stuff changes a whole lot. Like, nothing in here is so pivotal to the point where it feels like the faction's being redefined, but I really do think Freefolk are going to pivot quite a bit by seeing more Bear Riders and then more Giants. So I'm interested to see what everyone's kind of shooting for with this update, but I'm pretty happy with it overall. And again, thanks for watching the videos here. I know they're getting drawn out, but there's a lot to talk about here.